Hi, can you all hear me? Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to you all. For those who don't know me, I'm Madeline Grant, the parliamentary sketch writer and a columnist at the Daily Telegraph, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here for such an interesting and very timely panel discussion about innovation and digital skills held in partnership with Atos. I'm conscious that we only have an hour for this discussion, so I'm just going to crack on. It is often said that talent is equally distributed, opportunity is not. And the purpose of this panel will be to examine how businesses, local partnerships and government can work together to unlock potential across every area of the UK. And crucially, how can we make sure that we have the skills needed to create the jobs of the future and drive digital transformation? On our panel, we have George Freeman, the MP for beautiful Mid-Norfolk. George has been an MP continuously since 2010 and has been a great champion of all things tech and innovation. He currently holds the government post of Minister of State in the new Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. To my left, we have Lord Cornwall Ranger, who is the Senior Vice President, Head of Strategy, Marketing, Comms and Public Affairs, Northern Europe and the Asia-Pacific region of Atos, which is such a long job title. It really gives you a sense of how important he is. Cornwall has been a leading figure in the development and communication of innovative technology-led services in politics in both the public and private spheres. This includes having worked on the delivery of the London Oyster card and 4 years working for Boris Johnson at City Hall. Over there on the far right, we have Matt Robinson, who is Head of Nations and Regions at Tech UK, and he is leading Tech UK's work with members and stakeholders to increase the local digital capital across the UK's nation and regions, and amongst other things to ensure that digital technology plays a key part in the levelling up post-COVID-19 recovery. And he is also a Conservative councillor in Leeds. And last but not least, we have Margot James, who has had a fascinating and wide-ranging career, both as a Member of Parliament and as a businesswoman. Margot was the MP for Stourbridge between 2010 and 2019, and she also served as Minister for Digital and Creative Industries from 2018 to 2019. She co-founded the Shire Health Group and led its growth to over 100 staff before transitioning it to the multinational WPP. So without further ado, I think I'd like to begin, please, with Cornwall and his introductory remarks.
Thanks, Madeline. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Real pleasure to be here. It feels like there's a real sort of look forward. What can we do that will really be making those decisions that impact for the long term? But I say that because I'm sitting on a panel, and obviously, Madeline, we've just met, but with people who are basically very dear friends. And most of us have been at this for quite a long time. So what do I mean? And Madeline made a reference to my job title. It is rather long. But what it is that over the last 25 years, I've been really privileged to work in the delivery of public services, and a lot of those public services which have been in and around technology. It was about transport. I spent a significant part of my career in transport, but the theme of technology became ever increasing, and whether it was the Oyster card or mobile phone networks, or how do we get more data usage when we were at City Hall, setting up the London data store, looking at how the economy was going to work as you get new startups and investment. All of this has been driven by innovation and technology. And that's the top line. That's what everyone looks at. You know, we see our mobile phones, we've seen the development of smartphones, social media networks and everything else. And I've spoken a lot about things like our personal digital ecosystems that we've all created. We've all bought our infrastructure, which I call, this stuff. We pay for our connectivity, our broadband, and we join platforms, whatever they may be, LinkedIn, Facebook. And these things are all things that we do. And then people sell to us through these ecosystems. But all of that's great until you start saying, where is the delivery coming? Where are the skills to help get the right jobs and businesses that then deliver all these services? We can all be consumers, and we all are, and that's fantastic. We get the joy of living in a technology environment, an era of exciting technology. but that technology may not be being delivered here in the UK. Now, Atos, we're a global technology firm, French-based, over 100,000 people, 10,000 people in the UK. We provide infrastructure for many other businesses, be that NS&I Bank, be that hospitals like UCLH, or be that the infrastructure for the Olympic Games. We deliver all the technology that supports the Olympic Games as the prime provider. There's lots of other firms, but we make sure that works. We're number one in Europe for cybersecurity. We invest in AI, you may have heard of that a bit over the last couple of years, generative, looking at blockchain, all the R&D that you need to see the evolution of this technology. But the thing that started to become very important to me when I was looking at this was, where are we basing these jobs? And effectively, we were looking at low-cost environments to find those jobs. And that really meant places like India. And all of us, whether it's Atos or whether it's every other major tech firm in the world, has significant footprints in places like India, because that's where there was a cost saving and a skill set at a volume coming through that enabled us to have the kind of population that we needed to deliver the various projects that we're doing around the world. However, that labour arbitrage has become slightly more complicated because the costs are going up. The costs are going up, but also there is an opportunity for local digital skills to support that innovation in all of the countries that we're operating in. And so from my perspective, obviously I cover a large geography, but I look at the UK, and actually it was part of the Levelling Up agenda. And it was probably about a year and a half ago, we were at Spring Forum in Blackpool. And in advance of that, we were working with NS&I, who are based, they have quite a significant footprint in Blackpool. And they said, look, we need people with more digital skills to provide a pipeline to help support the 400 to 500 jobs that we have in Blackpool. But we can't find those people. Now, can we do something about helping to reskill, retrain, provide pathways for people who are, Blackpool has some of the most deprived areas in the country there. Can we do something from Levelling Up to help tackle that and provide a pathway for people to get into the jobs that are there right now, but will also be there in the future? And us, as an anchor employer there, we'd happily help with that. We'd happily want to support that kind of activity. So we called that Innovating Up. Looking at an area and saying, we've got anchor, and we're an anchor employer, we can see there's a need for more jobs with the right digital skills. Can we invest now to create those jobs for the medium and longer term? And not just in Blackpool, we've now been looking at that across the country in areas that we work with other organisations, and we had a round table in the West Midlands as well to look at what we can do there. So the objective is that if we're going to look at the economy, if we're going to talk about things like jobs of the future, can we work with businesses, can we work with a Levelling Up agenda that really tackles the issue about reskilling, uplifting people into employment, providing them with the skills for the jobs that are there now, but will also be there for the future, and really then support innovation being developed. I think this is a really exciting opportunity for the country. I think digital skills need to be spoken about a bit more. I know that the government is looking, I know George has been doing a lot around this, but particularly the local skills improvement plans. But what we need to do is make sure that when we talk about innovating up, and when we talk about levelling up, and because it's such a broad subject, it could mean almost anything, and it covers a lot of areas. But the economy and skills and the digital skills for the future will be something that will help us both grow and lift people up. And I think that's why we're focused on innovating up.
Great. Thank you so much. I think if I could hear from Matt next, please.
Thanks, Madeline, and it's great to be with you all today, and I'm really pleased to see so many people who are interested in this agenda. For those of you who don't know Tech UK is the trade association for the tech sector. We've 1,000 members who are based all across the UK, and as head of nations and regions, gosh, do I know that they're based all across the UK as well. They are from the Isle of Skye all the way down to the Isle of Wight and everything in between. And as Tech UK, we are always looking at what can help deliver for the tech sector, but also for people, place, planet and the economy all across the country. I think the work that Atos is doing on Innovating Up is crucial. And as Tech UK, we've been really, really pleased to partner with them on that. And the roundtable in the West Midlands that Culvia mentioned, I think we were really thinking that was going to be about innovation. It all came back to skills, time and time again, which is why this debate and the title of this debate is so appropriate. My role at Tech UK also means that I'm in charge of our local digital index, which will be published on the 16th of October. We decided not to publish it this week to avoid any announcements on HS2. We didn't want to clash with that, so we decided to delay it slightly. But what we do when we measure in our index, we measure the strength of the tech sector across the UK and what that looks like in the different areas of the UK, if you think of the West Midlands, Scotland, Yorkshire and Humber, but also when you start to get down to those city regions as well. And there is a really mixed picture. I think there's some things that we know and that we've proved through our data which show that actually when you're thinking about equity finance or you're thinking about venture capital raised, 65% of that plus is down in London, and even more when you consider it in the southeast. When you start to look at some of that equity finance for areas like the northwest, you're talking about 4.5%, in the West Midlands, less than 2%. So there is a real need to be thinking about how we can make sure that funding, particularly for startups and scale-ups, is reaching the areas that it needs to. There's also really, really interesting debates that need to be had on in terms of digital connectivity and what that means and what that looks like. When you consider things like Project Gigabit that the government's been pushing and has helped deliver on, actually what we've seen through our index measurements is that is having a real impact in terms of the coverage and where people can access broadband across the UK or gigabit broadband or 5G. The challenge now is turning that debate to start to think about uptake, because it's all well and good if Project Gigabit is delivering in parts of Cumbria, but if people literally are not going online to access public services, to change their job or to use this on a day-to-day basis, you start to ask yourself, what's the point? What's the return on investment from this? So it's important that we then start to consider the digital skills dialogue that we need to take forward. And it's really interesting when we consider the changing nature of tech as well, because the skills that we were talking about in the tech sector 10 years ago are not the skills that we need now, and they're probably not going to be the skills that we need in the next 10 years either. And we need to make sure that we are embedding this not just in terms of the national curriculum, but considering what this looks like in terms of our population more widely, and really high-level skills that we need to be encouraging through universities or people coming to this country to start their businesses as well. So this is a really complex debate that will help power the AI discussions that are happening all across different fringes this week. But ultimately, if we don't get digital skills right, this could all be for naught. I'll pause there. Thanks, Madeline.
Thank you. And now I think, George, please.
Matt, thank you. This being a Conservative Party conference, I'm going to make some political points. So I'm not going to tell you about how the UK is the third biggest tech economy in the world after the US and China, that we've got a $1 trillion tech sector, that we've got 147 unicorns, and that this is one of the most exciting bits of our economy, not just in its own right, but the tech from AI right down to basic digital is driving huge entrepreneurial and innovation activity, and I'm not going to tell you about the creation of the department to drive that all around the country and clusters and what's going on. I want to make three political points. The first is that, to me, the digital revolution is as much about citizenship, about empowerment, about competition, choice, insurgency. These are deeply conservative values. And I think we should be, yes, telling the story about the tech economy, yes, telling the story about tech as a platform, but there's something else missing here, and I think it's missing in the broader science agenda. It was science that smashed the tyranny of unaccountable elites in the Middle Ages in Europe, smashed the poverty that millions in Europe were trapped in through superstition and disease. Science drove the Enlightenment, and in the same way, I want to suggest that tech is the Conservative Party's greatest friend. The tech revolution will empower entrepreneurs, challenge monopolies, drive a culture of accountability, and I think we take the politics out of it. And the truth is, we've presided as a government over an extraordinary technology revolution. We don't talk about it in those terms, and I think it's really important that this party owns this and harnesses it in the culture of those values. And both in public services, we should be the party that's intolerant about failed bureaucratic elites letting down the customers, letting down the people relying on public services. The single biggest way you can drive the debate that's needed is use these so that people can see hospital performance, see public sector performance. So I think there's a political bit of this that we miss, and we make it dry and technocratic and rather scary, and we need to just own that. And by the way, if we really want to get on the green growth path to net zero and move it from being a top-down subsidised government programme, which is important in big bits of technology, and unleash a revolution of green growth, of empowered citizenship, of choice, of consumers choosing what they want to buy, then digitalisation will be key. And I dream of the day when every village, every family, every constituency, every business can look at their phone and say, and it'll be the kids going, "Dad, why are we in a red household driving a red car in a green county," or the opposite? And until we empower people with the data to really drive it through, I think we'll be stuck in a paradigm of top-down net zeroism, not empowered and enlightened citizenship. Second point, in no sector is this more urgent than in healthcare. And it was for that reason that I went to the Cabinet in 2011 and said, we haven't got a prayer of building a modern life science ecosystem if we don't grip the digitalisation. There was then no Minister for Digital Health in DH. It was the portfolio nobody wanted, so I volunteered. And I want to make quite an important point. The modern healthcare economy will be, and is already becoming, digital. And our top-down NHS structures are struggling to keep up, and they're trying to control it from the top. And I want to suggest that in healthcare, the revolution is active healthcare citizenship, and we should be empowering patients to start to take much more choice over their lives. We should merge the medtech app revolution with the NHS, and in mental health and in other areas, it's the only way we're going to get on top of it. And I think that is revolutionary in terms of how the NHS works and is structured. And I'll give you a very tangible opportunity example. We invest a huge amount in medical research. Clinical trials have fallen 40% since the pandemic. We've implemented the O'Shaughnessy review, put a whole lot of money in. But the single biggest thing, I think, would be if you get a diagnosis. I will soon, I'm sure, get a diabetes diagnosis. And I dream of a world where they'll say, well, Mr. Freeman, I'm so sorry you got diabetes, but the good news is you're one of 1.5 million patients in the UK. Here's your private login password. And it's run by Diabetes UK. This is a disease portal. You can find people in your neighbourhood who've got the disease. You can share recipes. You can slide the Freeman consent bar to enrol in research. I'm serious. And Diabetes UK, the charity, can then go to industry and say, we've got 1.5 million patients who want to get involved in trials. And I think digitalisation in healthcare is stuck in a paradigm of the government saying, I mean, this is a general point, it's not a party political point, of trust us, we're the government, we need to use your data to run the health service more efficiently. Not, it's your data, it belongs to you, the patients. We're here to empower you to use it to drive a better healthcare economy. And I think we should really own that agenda. And my last point is, you might expect me to give a big speech about AI. In fact, I want to make the point that whilst AI is transformational and hugely exciting, I think that talking about AI when we still haven't got proper digital connectivity, even in Manchester, you can't cross Manchester without losing signal, let alone in rural Norfolk. And if we really want to harness the genius of the innovation economy to give every citizen in this land a chance to belong to the innovation economy, then basic digitalisation is utterly transformational. And I close with one final story. When I took the big tent to Coventry to celebrate Jaguar Land Rover and the Green Revolution, and what we discovered as we're putting up the tent and talking to local leaders, is why it's quite important to get out. The local BBC, head of BBC in Coventry, who was helping us, her son had done a bit of time and was a digital entrepreneur. He was running a nightclub for people who'd crossed the wrong side of the tracks. We discovered that in Coventry there is a huge underground, literally, nightclub community of largely black and minority ethnic gaming entrepreneurs who nobody at the LEP or the council or any of us had known about. We'd gone there to celebrate Jaguar Land Rover, which is a great business doing great stuff. But I just make the point that underground in this country, literally often underground, there's whole communities of street entrepreneurs below the line, and we need to make them our friends and make this party there for them and harness their genius to drive a new economy.
Thank you so much, George. I actually was born in Leamington Spa, and you might think of that as a place. Really? No way. And you know, you might think of that as a kind of Jane Austen Bath spin-off, but it actually has this extraordinary, vibrant gaming sector that not enough people are aware of. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Over to you, Margot.
Thank you very much, Madeline. And thank you, Atos, for sponsoring this event. It's really, really important, digital skills and capabilities, important for social mobility, important for levelling up, important for infrastructure, and as George has just said, public services. And it's vital for our productivity increases that we so desperately need and our international competitiveness. So I've been on an interesting journey over the last 5 years, which has taken me from Parliament and being a minister in DCMS with responsibility for digital to the University of Warwick, where I've been for 3.5 years viewing policy and impact from the other end of the telescope. And it's been very interesting. And I'll share with you a couple of microcosms of what I've learned that impacts digital skills and how we build them. One thing, a couple of programs that WMG do, one is called Digital for Manufacturing, and it's been a hugely successful program that we've run for 5 years, and we've touched hundreds of, about 5,000 businesses, that's right, 5,000 manufacturing SMEs have benefited from this program. And we found very willing entrepreneurs and small businesses that wanted to engage, wanted to digitize, but just didn't really know how. And it's been a hugely successful program. And adjacent to that, Andy Street asked me to chair a regional task force on electrification, because obviously automotive is in our blood in the Midlands, and the whole EV transition requires different skill sets, and it requires supply chains that have got those skill sets and are oriented to the EV needs of the future of the car industry. And also we need to attract a battery manufacturing capability into this country. So we're all thrilled, of course, with the recent Tata announcement, and congratulate the Prime Minister and other ministers on securing that. So what we find, what the lessons really that I've seen, on the skills side, we worked on a programme to build EV skills. And for that, representing a university where Warwick, WMG, Warwick Manufacturing Group, which is part of the University of Warwick, has more degree apprenticeship students than any other Russell Group university. But that obviously operates at sort of level 6 and above in terms of the skills needs. And if you're looking at the battery manufacturing sector, will definitely need skills at that level, but the majority of jobs generated by gigafactories are actually level 2 to level 5, which is not taught at university level. So you need to engage further education colleges. And what I found was, I guess I knew this really from my days as an MP, that they live on a shoestring. I mean, they cannot afford to invest in training for jobs that aren't there already. So it's very difficult to build the future skill needs that the auto sector are going to require through the FE college setup. So what we did at WMG was engage with Colleges West Midlands, and we've developed a training programme for college lecturers at no cost to the FE colleges at all, because universities are better endowed, frankly, than the FE sector and can afford to do it. And we're now working with about 10 colleges across the region, and that way we will start to build the skills needed, and many of them are digital skills. And what I think in terms of policy that means is I'm right behind the gradual devolution of skills to the regional mayors and the combined authorities, and that's happening in the West Midlands and I think in 1 or 2 other regions as well. And it could happen quicker, to be honest. That's what we desperately need, because these sort of skills they're local, you know. Up in the northeast, it will be more chemicals, it will be more sustainable energy, renewables, and other regions will have different needs. So we need that. And if we look at digital skills more widely in high-value manufacturing, you really have a division between companies that have the wherewithal to invest in digitisation and companies that don't. And the ones that don't really do need to, otherwise they'll be well and truly left behind. But Make UK, which is the trade body for manufacturing, stated last year that a lack of digital skills remains the biggest barrier to adoption of industrial digital technologies. And they did a survey of their members and to identify the obstacles. Why isn't this happening more readily? And 41% of respondents said that it was because they weren't really aware of the appropriate technologies. And often that is because they don't have the knowledge, they are sold at by different technology companies, and they don't really trust what they're being told, so there's a kind of inertia that builds up and they do nothing. In fact, 30% admitted that they were resistant to the change and there was a general inertia. Cost, that was another 34%. It can be very, very costly. And security fears were mentioned by 22%. So those are the sorts of obstacles. But digital skills is right up there and accounts in large part why the UK lags other countries. I mean, George mentioned our fantastic tech industry and all those 147 unicorns and all of that. And that's absolutely fantastic. And it is the leading technology industry in Europe by some distance. But when it comes to the adoption of that technology and the skills required to actually implement it through the economy, we really drop down. And we drop down the league table, and that's something that we've really got to reverse. And lastly, the variations between sectors. I was interested to hear George talk about the health service and public services, and I very much agree with him. It's desperately needed. But a study done by DCMS last year and Ernst & Young the year before was looking at the rate of deployment of AI. And what they found was that over 50% of firms in financial services make regular use of AI, almost 40% media and telecoms, 30% law firms, and probably obviously more now. But when it came to health, 12%. I found that incredible because I think health has more to benefit from AI than almost any other sector. And the digital infrastructure in hospitals is just not good enough. And the research sets out all the reasons, and it's all about skills and training, and this is what doctors tell us anyway, skills and training, slow and complex regulations, and resistance to the processing of patient data. And if this comes up in the Q&A, I've got a little statement I was asked to sign when I changed general practice, and I thought, my God, no wonder patients are withholding their data when they read what they've got to sign. It's crazy. Finally, the Chancellor has identified that public services will deliver better outcomes through technology because we can't afford as a country to layer on endless increases in public spending at the moment. So that's obvious. So he's looking at technology as being the answer, and I completely agree with him. But what's really concerning is how limited the ambition is. He's set up a productivity review, which I think is being run by the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And I gather that they're looking to technology to provide a 0.5% improvement in productivity. I think it's capable of way more than that. And I hope that the government will increase its ambition, and I'm sure George is right there to bring that absolutely about. So thank you very much, Madeleine, and thank you, Atos.
Thank you. I'm going to keep my questions pretty brief so that we can get to the audience Q&A ASAP. But yeah, a few specific questions that I had. Firstly, to George, I was very interested in something you said about the levelling up ambition, that essentially it is quite a nebulous concept that can mean different things to different people. And the impression I get from working in the House of Commons and listening to contributions on the floor of the House, is that often levelling up is talked about as a kind of way to, divvy up money to specific constituencies so that then the MPs can go and have a kind of headline figure that they can talk about and revel in the success. But I worry if that is perhaps it's not being potentially strategic enough, if it is just siphoning off cash to different parts of the country. Are there ways that the government can make the levelling up ambition more kind of, kind of organised and strategic and part of some very particular goals?
Yes, and I think I understand the picture you're painting, and I can see why, but it's a misrepresentation. I still happen to think that levelling up is the central unifying mission of this Conservative generation and government. Boris was right to make it absolutely foundational, and I think Rishi is right to focus on delivering it properly. And whilst I do think there's an important point about making sure that the towns, the left-behind areas have some catalyst for innovation. As Minister for Innovation in DCIT, I can tell you that we have a very, very profound strategy, and it is that in order to continue to increase our innovation economy, by the way, in the last 13 years, we've taken it from 1.4% of GDP to 3%, 2.9%. And that is an innovation economy. We've grown it here, folks, in the last 13 years. The absolute key to the next phase is to get it out beyond the Golden Triangle of Cambridge, London, Oxford. And we're doing a number of tangible things. Firstly, we've committed, a very bold commitment Michael Gove and I have made, to take R&D outside the Greater South East in our department to over 50%. And that's why last year we set out the 3 big innovation accelerators in Glasgow, West Midlands and Manchester. But much more than that, our global message to investors, there's a wall of money out there to come into the UK, is we all know about Oxford, Cambridge, London. But if you go around this country, you will find from Edinburgh superfast computing, animal veterinary health, to Glasgow satellites, to Manchester materials and advanced manufacturing, to Sheffield, to Leeds digital health, to Norwich agri-tech, to London tons, to the South Coast, Guildford space corridor, to Cornwall earth observation, to the Cheltenham Gloucester quantum. There's about 25 of these clusters all around the country. They're not red, yellow, blue or green. They're not square or triangular. They're ecosystems of innovation, people taking risks to make cool stuff happen. And we've set out, through the creation of DCIT, a fundamental change in government policy from making national announcements that regional clusters have to run around and find the money, to mapping them properly. And we're about to unveil the first ever digital heat map of these clusters all around the country, to drive 3 big things. Firstly, investment. Here in the West Midlands, here in Manchester and in the West Midlands and in 10 or 15 other of our big clusters, there is room for them to each generate £1 billion odd worth of infrastructure and R&D investment. We should let them. Let the mayors, and if you haven't got a mayor, then allow places to form cluster development corporations and raise the money privately and build that ecosystem. Secondly, this is about making sure that local leaders and local places can understand be empowered to tell their story. And there are clusters like Bio Yorkshire, which UKRI didn't really know was out there. And it's a combination of agri-tech, food research, food science, plastic substitution, bioengineering. So these clusters are taking shape, and we need to map them properly and have a different conversation with them. And thirdly, policy making. Enough of Whitehall issuing diktat in silos, and that's why every cluster visit, Thursday, Friday, I take officials from UKRI, from DCIT, from across government out to see what's actually happening. It's a big change, and I think we should own it politically and remind people that the transformation in Glasgow in the last 7 years, take it from the local Labour leader of the council, Minister, this has been transformational. In 7 years. That's us, that's the Conservative Party, transforming left-behind areas. So I think there's a much bigger piece than just cash handouts for MPs in red wall seats. It's about genuinely growing an R&D and innovation economy all around the country.
Great. Corvia, do you want to come in?
Yeah, look, I will never disagree with anything George says. I think all of that is great. I think there's a bit more of a supplementary that we need to, as a party, and I loved what you said, George, about tech, can be the Conservative Party's greatest friend. I'm wondering which hat I'm wearing right now, because obviously Atos, Tech UK, and a Conservative peer. But when I look at the future of this country and I look at other countries, we are now a digital society, and the question is, how do we make that democratic for everyone to feel they're part of a digital society? We can talk about R&D, and we can talk about innovation, and we can talk about businesses and unicorns, but the average person will not feel that. In fact, they'll feel a gap and a distance from that. And I think politically, the debate will be in this decade, which party democratizes technology for the people, for the masses, to make them feel that they are part of this changing world. And for that, and it's why I'm focused on digital skills, I think the skills agenda will help give everyone a sense of how they can enter into this world and feel part of it. I keep saying, at the moment, we're just being sold to. We are being commoditized, we are being servitized, whether it's which data are we going to have, who are we going to opt in and out of, et cetera, et cetera. But how do we make people feel they have some vested ownership in this? And I think that's going to be our challenge from industry. I say that because we need to have people believing in the trust in what big organizations, whether it's Atos, IBM, all the others out there, the work that we're doing needs to be understood by people, and they need to feel that they can trust it because we're delivering all the services that potentially they may use. But how do they also feel they have a part of that they can influence it, that they can own it? And I think that's where politics will have a huge part to play in this decade.
Thank you. Brief question for Margot. From what you were saying, I very much got the impression of, we're a country that has all these entrepreneurial aspects. We're sitting on this great legacy of tech, innovation, etc. But there's also opportunities that seem to be passing us by because we haven't kind of taken them as enthusiastically perhaps as we should. And I wonder what would be the single biggest thing that the government might do to try to support tech and support innovation and promote digital industries. If you were still working in government, what's the kind of top thing that you would propose?
Well, I think the top thing I would propose is something that would liberate the capital that tech companies need to grow. I mean, it is fantastic we've got 147 tech unicorns, so things are working, but I think they could be working much better. I think one of our panelists mentioned the access to equity finance outside of London and the southeast, and I think I heard a percentage of about 3% in the Midlands, and then up in the north it's just as bad, and this was a problem when I was in government. And the problem is getting adequate financing, and actually the publicly underwritten sources of finance from organisations like the British Business Bank, they need to have their risk appetite altered. They're not, in my view, they're too risk averse. Yes, it's better than the high street lending, but it's still too risk averse. And when you've got a startup that has real scale up potential, you need to give them the capital before they have an absolutely watertight case, because once they've got that, they can access capital easily anyway. So I think that we need to look at the scaling up of technology businesses, and I think there's another thing we then need to do, obviously, to get the skills and increased, and also the uptake of that technology across the rest of the economy. But we do need to protect our tech sector. There's a lot of other countries wanting to eat our lunch, and there's various things that have happened that have made, that have emboldened them. And, we need to, I think, really invest in that sector. Although it's doing really well, it needs more push to make sure it keeps doing really well.
Great. And finally, just a brief question for Matt, if I may. A big feature of political discourse at the moment seems to be this idea that increasingly in Britain it's very difficult to get things built, to get planning permission, and things that other countries can do an awful lot easier than us, like big infrastructure projects and the question mark hanging over HS2, etc., that we are no longer able to do things quickly and efficiently. And I'm really interested in this idea of things like, a city like Cambridge finds that it cannot expand available lab space. The Oxford-Cambridge arc seems to be up in the air again. And I wondered, to Matt, how much you think that, however much we have these brilliant ambitions about what we want to do and making good use of the technology, but unless there is also perhaps some liberalisation of planning and making it easier to build, are we just sort of back at square one again?
I think it's a great question. You will never hear me say that devolution is a bad thing, but there is a real risk that what we're doing with devolution is sending a check out to some of the regions and not seeing some of the accountability coming back. When you consider on things like digital infrastructure strategies, 12% of local authorities don't have them. If you don't have a strategy, you don't have a plan of what you're intending to deliver, that is a real problem. When you then escalate that up and you consider things like the national grid, actually 40% of confirmed projects that are going through the national grid, their delivery date is beyond 2030. Well, that's ridiculous when we're considering actually what that means for net zero, what that means in terms of quantum computing, what that means in terms of data centres that fundamentally underpin our sector. So there are some changes that can be delivered at a government level. There are also changes that can be delivered through elected mayors as well, and making sure that they realise that they've got skin in the game. This isn't just waiting for government to do something. There are things that they can do locally as well. And that could actually make a big, big difference. And to use George's metaphor in terms of ecosystems, there isn't, it's like a garden. You overwater it, that's going to cause a problem. You too much sun, it's going to cause a problem. So there isn't just one thing that you can do. This is all of us working together to deliver for UK PLC.
Great. Well, I think now it's probably time to open up to questions. And I believe we have a couple of roving mics doing the round here. So why don't I take maybe 3 at a time and then we can answer them in the round. So how about this lady here at the front and this gentleman here and the lady just behind him? Thank you.
Thank you. Ali Griffiths from Gisborne Partners. So two related questions. First of all, in terms of skills, we don't know what the jobs are going to be in 5-10 years' time. So what are the soft skills that we need to be developing in order to create the agility? And secondly, in terms of cybersecurity, many people don't have exposure to cyber awareness training, either in their workplace or in the home. Is this something that the government should actually be thinking about, something that they take on over and above just an in-workplace scheme?
Great. In fact, should we just answer these 2 questions now? Does anybody want to come in on the point about soft skills? Yep, Corvia.
Absolutely, yes. Look, I think it's very hard to project what other jobs are going to be there, say, in a decade's time. But we're seeing a fundamental issue right now, and I say this as someone who represents a big corporate, in the people we recruit, the younger people that we bring in, the grads, the apprentices, the interns, struggling, and there are many reasons for it, but struggling to look at the kind of things that we're asking them to do now. And there's probably a disconnect between the academic structures that we currently have and even now what industry is looking for these people to be able to do. And I think that gap will only widen unless we look at schooling, the academic curriculum, and say, what can we do? And that plays into your second point about cybersecurity. When better to teach people about cybersecurity than when they are at school? And especially as, I'm a father of 2 young boys, and I worry about how much exposure they're having to a digital world through things like online gaming and various other things. And how much do they know about it? And if they don't know about it, where are they going to find out about it? Because they're not going to find out about it in the current curriculum. So we need to do something here. That I keep harking back to this anchor point, which is we are now a digital society, and we need to embed that into all areas of policy and education. I think we're going to look at how people engage and provide more of an understanding of how technology provides a service. At the moment, we work on a top line where someone presses a button, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. The soft skills will be more analytical about understanding what happens when you press the button, what's happening behind that. Because otherwise, we're just going to have people who be in call centres and just answering phones and things. So I think it's more about understanding behind that.
Great. Anybody else want to come in on any of those, or should we move on to the next question? Okay. Yes, let's move on. The gentleman here, please.
Is this working? Oh, it is. Okay. Richard Ambliss. I'm representing Cornwall as a councillor. Cornwall's a bit misunderstood. We have the fastest line speeds in the country by far. Okay, so all the subsea cables that come in and out of the country actually come in Cornwall. And so we've got line speeds at Goon Hillier of 12,800,000 megabits per second. And in a lot of places along there, 10,000. I think the average in this country is 50. And we have exponential growth of tech companies, particularly creative tech at the moment. So we're trying to set up a cluster. We've got Falmouth University will be setting up a faculty for screen and digital technologies soon. We're trying to concentrate on getting the other support structures like specialised legal advice and what have you. We have two issues. So despite the rapid growth, we need to get the word out that, because you're all probably amazed that it's not a quaint county full of fishers and farmers and quaint seaside villages, just to get the word out. But the biggest barrier we have to growing this is housing. There's no way for them to live. Yeah. Okay, and that's typical of Cornwall. So that'd be the question, what can you do to help? But as George has mentioned, what I would call a patient engagement programme, you may be interested to know that we've done it overseas, and it does work. It doesn't work if it's run by white coats, and the funding model is difficult, but we found a way of funding it, which is the pharmaceutical and biotech companies jumped at the opportunity to pay for this. Okay, so perhaps a conversation for later. But I'd like to address Cornwall, because I understand that George may be visiting us down there. Is that true? Yes.
George, I think that's probably one for you.
Do you want to take two more and then I'll come back to it? Or?
Oh, sure. OK, fine. Yes, go to the lady there, please.
Oh, hi, I'm Satna Chadha from London Tech Futures, and we help young Londoners access digital skills. My question is to the panel on the local skills improvement plans. They currently have digital skills in there, but they don't define what they are, and it's called essential digital skills. And it'll be good if we could discuss how we can get these to higher digital skills and what is going to be delivered, and we work with the people developing these. So some thoughts around that.
OK, great. Well, I think, George, if you would like to take that point about Cornwall, about housing and promoting these regions.
Yeah. So Cornwall is a brilliant example of what I was talking about earlier, the innovation economy driving out into the windy left-behind corners of the kingdom that have spectated on a London model of growth. And what's going on in Cornwall, the space sector, Goon Hillier, Earth observation, satellite tracking, the cluster around it, combined with coding. And there's a very interesting point here about economic regeneration. Arts and the role of arts in driving regeneration. The two most expensive bits of property in East Anglia are Aldborough and Burnham Market, and they became refuges for artists in the 1920s. That was where artists went because they were cheap. And we've forgotten, I think, part of the role of art in driving regeneration and creating places with a story to tell. And Cornwall's doing it really well. Yeah, I'm on my way down I've cancelled the traditional ministerial visit where the Whitehall officials wheel you out to congratulate them on a tiny announcement that nobody cares about, normally 25 minutes from your department. I don't do any of those. I do big cluster visits. I go on a Thursday, Friday, 2 days, 17 meetings. We do small businesses, and I drag my officials out to come and recognise that people taking risks in driving innovation around the country are the ecosystem that we're here to serve. It's a very different message. So I'm coming down soon to showcase it and find out what we need to do. I think housing is I mean, it's a massive problem in Cornwall, right? It's a big problem in Norfolk as well. I think it's soluble through a rather different approach. And I think housing policy has been dominated too much by the big volume house builders and driving through big commuter housing estate dumping. We need to empower Cornwall County Council and local communities there. And I think if you had more affordable rural housing, I mean, in all of those beautiful Cornish resorts, the second home is fine. But you've got to have someone who's going to fry the fish and service the fishing boats. And there are plenty of examples of how you can do this. Affordable rural housing, shared equity schemes for people who work locally. So we have to make sure that the local housing model works. But also, there are And Falmouth is a good example. Some fantastic dockland harbour regeneration flats. We talk a lot about house building. We need to build some flats as well. And there are plenty of young people who'd love to go down to Cornwall, start a coding company, take a flat, not buy a 4-bedroom house, take a flat. So I think if we let Cornwall shape its own housing needs, I suspect you'll be able to solve this rather better than Whitehall. The skills point, I'm deferring to others because they're more experienced in it, but I just make the point that in all these clusters that we're mapping, I ask the same question to thrusting, growing companies. Has anyone here in Cornwall or in the North East or in Manchester just mapped out what projections you've got locally for new job creation over the next 3, 6, 10 years? And they haven't. They could very quickly, and they do. And we're building this into the cluster mapping. There seems to be a gap between that and the local skills improvement plans. And I'm about to sit down with Rob Halfon and try and work out why. We're building a really good framework of T-levels, apprenticeships, FE courses, but there seems to be a disconnect between that national framework and what regional clusters really need. And we should be there to serve what those clusters are really looking for. And I take that as a challenge.
Great. Colby and Margot, either of you like to come in on the point about the schools improvement?
Yes. I think that one thing that's vital is that we push ahead with more devolution of skills. The lifetime learning package is a good thing because it touches on the point that I think it was Ali that raised in her question about, members of the public, not necessarily for a particular job, do need to be brought along with the skills enhancements to take part fully in the digital life of the nation. And through lifetime learning, people can access that. I think at regional level, digital boot camps, I think there's a huge demand for these, and these do offer the sort of advanced, I think you said higher digital learning that's needed, because you've got the essential skills, and they are needed by a good 20% of the population, and that's at the basic level. Entry level, if you like, but also the higher level is necessary, and boot camps can be a very good solution. They're quite intensive, and people have to commit, a significant amount of time to undertake them, but there's no shortage of demand for the ones that West Midlands Combined Authority run.
Great. Do we have any more questions? Okay, great. There's a gentleman here and a lady here, and the lady just there in the blue dress. Would you like to go first?
Sure. Hello, Sophie de Schwartzberg-Gunter. Lovely to see you all. I have a question about the older generation. My parents, who very sadly passed aged 82 and 92 just before COVID, they had me and my sister to help them keep, and I'm no spring chicken, up to speed with technology. But there are a lot of people who don't have children and who feel very disconnected. And technology keeps moving forward, and I suspect there will always be that older generation who don't feel up to speed. So we talk a lot about young people, but our older generation is a growing percentage of the population, and I think we need a proactive approach to keep them engaged with the digital age.
That's a really, really good question.
Very good.
Matt, would you like to come in on
Do you
the...
want to take all three? And
Oh, yeah, sure.
sorry.
Sure. Sorry. Who else? There we go, the lady there.
Hi, I'm Helen Milner. I'm the Chief Exec of Good Things Foundation, so we're the UK's leading digital inclusion charity, so it probably follows on well. I think if you can answer the question for older people, let's do it for the working age adults as well. So we have 10 million people in this country who lack the very, very basic digital skills. More than 2 million people can't afford connectivity, and 59%, so more than half of our working age population, do not have essential digital skills for work. So when we're looking at unlocking the potential for the UK and digital skills, we need a proper escalator that goes right down into communities, right down into that very basics. So if we focus too much on the top and we don't invest in the whole escalator, so what more can we do to make sure that we get that proper investment in the whole escalator and we don't just focus on those top level skills?
Great, thank you. And now the gentleman at the front.
My question is for you, George. My name is Lalit Suryavanshi. I'm Leeds-based medical technology company, 5 years in the running, supported really well by Tech UK, NIHR, Innovate UK. You spoke about digital health and what we can do, and we have an amazing application, of course, I'll say that, and we support the patients. But it is very difficult for a SME like us to scale up in NHS. And what? Because that is then linked to equity financing, because all the venture capitalists think that it's very risky to get inside NHS. So what you think government can do, because the policy is there, by the way, cloud, digital, all sorts of things, but on the ground, we find it very difficult to gain access to hospitals. So in 6 years, I'm in only 6 hospitals. So.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, I think I'll come to Matt for an answer on that point about digital inclusion. I think you can probably take both of the ladies' questions at once.
Yeah, I think they're really, really important questions, and the trick in tackling this is there is not just one approach. We can't just aim at the high-level skills and say we're going to encourage the next set of entrepreneurs and bring a Silicon Valley here and ignore then people who are digitally excluded, whether they're older people, whether they're working age. So you need a much more nuanced approach. And I do think that that is where the devolution agenda that Margot said about in terms of digital skills can have an impact and deliver more. I think that we need to make sure that there's an accountability with that. Perhaps slightly controversially at a Conservative Party conference, Andy Burnham isn't all bad on this. And Andy Burnham, some of the things that Andy Burnham's talked about in terms of the MBAC actually are really important for changing digital skills, but that doesn't take account of older people as well. So you have to have a much more nuanced approach. The other element that I think this lady talked about is essential digital skills. We don't see it as a trajectory where we see it as you've done your bit of digital skills, you're sorted, move on to the next person. Actually, it isn't like that. The nature of tech constantly changing means that people need to constantly be reskilling, whether they are working in the tech sector or just using tech on a day-to-day basis. So there is much more that we can do in that. And I think there's reforms in terms of the apprenticeship levy that can happen in that sense. There's definitely things that we need to be doing to revise and renew the national curriculum to take account of that. But also, in closing, Madeleine, I'd say there are some people who you're just never going to reach them as well. I think we get behind this element of thinking we've got to get 100% of people. Some people are really reluctant and they're just not going to do this. We need to pick our wins and target that really, really strongly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Margot?
Thank you. Yes, digital inclusion is so important, Sophie. I couldn't agree with you more about older people and also people with disabilities. They are both underrepresented in participating in the digital life of our country. And I think that, yes, Matt is right that there are some people who just won't engage and they are to be found more predominantly in these groups. But I think it partly depends on who the messenger is. You know, if you have the government or a big company like Atos or Google, they do this as well, putting on learning events, I think a lot of older people might just be off-put. They might think they won't fit into that environment. So engage with something like Age UK. And that way, they are more likely to engage and deliver the programme through people who older people or people with disabilities will trust. I also think the lifetime learning allowance should mean lifetime. It shouldn't stop at whatever age it does stop in practice. I don't think there is a limit that the government has set. I may be wrong, but in practice I'm sure that most of the funding will go to people of working age, and that's not right because lifetime goes way beyond when you stop in the workplace. Just to your point on accessing the NHS, my heart sinks for you because when I was in business we were always trying to do that on behalf of clients mostly, and it is incredibly difficult, especially if you try nationally. But what I would advise is if you can afford to go trust by trust, that would be the route. But potentially a shortcut would be, Matt mentioned Andy Burnham, and it reminded me that health policy is devolved in the North West. I think it's the only region, George will correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the only region where that can be said. And I think if you go through the combined authority who have responsibility for health outcomes and talk in terms of outcomes, you might actually break the door down. But be under no illusion on how much investment you'll have to make.
Great. Finally, from Corva, and I think this will have to be our last comment because we have reached the end of our time. So if you could be
and I'll make it
brief
brief because my throat's giving up. But I think that there's been a great discussion and debate, and thank you for your questions. But from our perspective as a business, but it's also my perspective, it's about society. This is now another era of a digital society. And we need to look at all, whether it's inclusion, aging population, hard-to-reach areas. How do we make sure that it's not just focused on the economy, and R&D, but it's focused on all people. Sorry, excuse me. I'll leave it there.
Heroic answer there, managed to get through. Well done. Sorry, George, I completely forgot that.
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up Sophie and Levitt's point
Yeah.
because they're linked on, and I'm going to go back to healthcare. Old people have other interests beyond healthcare, but it is a predominant feature of getting old that your health requires more and more time. And my mother is 83, and in Norfolk, the GPs they're sort of digitalised for themselves, so they can track their own patients, but there's no connectivity between that and the hospitals. You go into the hospital, as my mother's done, they can tell you exactly who she saw while she was there, and then you're out, and there's no connectivity to the social care sector. There is no proper continuity. And my mother wouldn't have the skills anyway, but I, as her power of attorney and as her next of kin, should, and I want to be able to track her journey on here and check what she's been diagnosed and check she understands it. So I think the healthcare bit is key for the elderly as well. And actually, if we get that right, then, Lavit, your problem is very well described. When I was a VC, if anyone came to me, as they always did, and said, I've got a great investment, it'll save the NHS millions, I'd just close my book and say, I'm sorry, I've only got a 10-year fund. It'll take you more than 10 years to get adopted, because the NHS is 470 organisations with dysfunctional metrics, incentives. If you deliver more for less, we give you less. We don't reward innovation. So that's why I'm so passionate about putting the power in the hands of the patients. And in healthcare, draw a line down the middle of the line, pre-diagnosis and post. In pre-diagnosis, all of us, most of us are now worried, well, we've got Fitbits, we're tracking our diet and our steps and our apps. But in the health system, it's analog still. The providers track their own performance for their own reasons, but it's not a seamless journey. And this is absolutely key, or we're going to end up with a completely dysfunctional health system where the vast majority of people who use the most health, the elderly, are condemned to waiting for letters from organisations that aren't linked to the other one, while the young expect digitalisation seamlessly, and when they hit the healthcare peak, they're going to be amazed to discover that it's not digital. So it is really key that we digitalise health in the interest of the patients.
Can I add one thing? Health insurers, because I have this argument every year. Health insurers do not, I'm sorry to interrupt, but they do not link to your digital information. So you're judged against your peer group, even if you have digital information. That needs to change.
Definitely. Sorry, Margot.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention this because talking of the NHS, it's the most data-rich health service in the world. But what use is data if it's not available and accessible? And when I was just mentioning, during my few words that I just recently changed GP practice, and I was asked to sign this. I am happy for identifiable information about me to be shared with the Health and Social Care Information Centre, okay, for the use within the NHS. And I do consent to identifiable information about me being passed on to any other organisation for any purpose. Well, frankly, as an ex-digital minister, I agreed, but I don't think many people would. And it's got to change. I think that patient guardian's got her hands on this or something, George. And something has got this draconian approach to sharing data. And it's not even true, really. It's not really identifiable. Anyway, I just wanted to raise that point in your hearing, George.
Well, thank you so much. And on that suitably angry note, I'm going to end this discussion now. Thank you so much for coming and for all your insightful questions, and to our wonderful panellists.